Welcome. I'm your host, Paula Scatoloni, the founder of Transformative Harmonics, a podcast that offers listeners a synthesis of ancient wisdom and modern science. Welcome back. I am so glad to be here today with you, listeners, sharing space and time with a guest who I've known for a while through my programs, but I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to catch up, see how she's doing and the programs that she's offering, and also begin to expand our awareness of how sound can be used both for healing personal, ancestral, and collectively. So Marika Heinrichs is a psychotherapist, a body worker, writer, and teacher whose work lives at the intersection of embodiment and justice. Her practice draws from numerous somatic traditions, including animism and traditional European folk wisdom. She teaches in both so-called Canada and internationally, and is the co-founder of a foundation training for somatic practitioners called Embodied Ancestral Inquiry. Marika lives in Dish with One Spoon territory, colonially known as Guelph, Canada, lands of the Adawandran, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, of the Mississauga of the Credit. She is here today to share with us what she's been up to and her journey with somatics and sound. Good morning, Marika. It is such a pleasure to be here with you. I've looked forward to this discussion for a while. I know we tried to get it on the books a few times, so I'm glad that we did. And we've been weaving in and out with each other for a few years now. So it felt really important to just sit down and have a conversation, not only for myself to kind of see the places where we cross over and weave, but also some of the distinct things that you're doing, which I've been following and tracking for a while myself. And you're just a rock star to me. So I wanted to kind of bring you in and start to hear more. Our paths are meeting at the intersection of sound. So of course, in this podcast, we're talking about all the different ways that sound can be therapeutic and how it's used. And I know that you use it. So we will, tap into that as well. But my hope is to start to hear a little bit about you and your journey, of how you came to this point. Maybe, prior to the sound. I know you're out there doing lots of work with communities, with relational connection, relational skills, activism, and embodiment. So all super important right now. So I'll pass to you if we want to start to hear a little bit more about you and how you started this journey into somatics, embodied somatics, and sound.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and you've been such an important influence and teacher for me in my journey as well. So I'm really grateful to be able to share this conversation. And for me, somatics and embodiment came really as a path in a moment of I was really burnt out from community organizing work, and I was really struggling with a lot of hopelessness and grief, and didn't have a sense of how to kind of navigate that with the levels of harm and oppression and just the power behind the kind of systems that we're really grappling with. And so it wasn't necessarily an intentional, I didn't know very much about somatics. This was well over a decade ago, so a very different time in terms of conversations about embodiment and somatics, and especially the intersection of somatics and social justice, or whatever we want to kind of call that. And so I really feel like that work found me. And through a couple of, hearing about workshops and sort of dropping into little things here and there and really orienting to places where people were talking about healing in a collective way, in a cultural way, and bringing together the kind of macro and micro, and how do these systems that we live in, how are they traumatizing us, and how are we carrying that in our bodies and in our interpersonal relationships? So it was really the kind of question that excited me and drove me for a long time. And so I left the work that I was doing as a community health worker and as an organizer, and I went and I moved across the country and I went to school to become a therapist. And somehow, really in a way that feels so just kind of beautiful and meant to be, the place where I moved, I happened to find, I was actually looking for a massage therapist. And a friend of mine said, well, I know this person here who does somatics. And I didn't even really know what that was. And it turns out that she was actually trained in a lineage called generative somatics, which is really the lineage that brought somatics and social justice together. And so what a coincidence that I found, in this time that I found this person who continues to be the practitioner that I work with. And I really started to heal from a lot of the pain and hurt of doing work that's really about confronting systems of harm and the ways in which we can be harmed in the process. And that was a very healing time. And then I started a practice. I did more training and began to feel some of the limitations of one-on-one work, especially when we're working in this kind of politicized context. And then I guess it was 2020? I came across a post in, I think, a Facebook group that I was in about polyvagal theory. And I have studied with Aline Lapierre and neuroaffective touch, and so got to really immerse myself in polyvagal theory in her training. And I've also studied biodynamic craniosacral work. And so I was really interested in this kind of developmental, embryological, nervous system approach. And I saw your post, and you were advertising or, kind of putting word out about, I'm doing these groups with the SSP. And I thought, a group? And I'd actually done the SSP once before by myself. I'd had sort of a provider kind of give me access to it and meet with me once. And then I kind of did it on my own and sort of checked in with her and had some good results, but didn't find it. There was just something really compelling about the way in which you were bringing that modality together with others that I don't know, I just knew I needed to be a part of it. And so I joined that initial group, and it was really so transformative because for many reasons, but I think the experience of each of us being in our own environments, in our own spaces, in our own bodies, and having our own healing experiences, quite profound, but also sharing this collective field, this collective space that was being kind of co-created through your space holding and co-regulation, through all of us showing up with each other, and then through the use of sound through the SSP. And it really opened something up for me in terms of how we can heal in community in a way that I'd been really longing for and really craving. And then, and I'm really a believer in participating in the things that we offer as practitioners ourselves. So I did that group with you, and then I think I did it again a year later. And similarly, so wonderful. And then I felt ready to start offering that sort of model or structure myself. And the other part of that was really moving for me was how you integrated a relational movement. And that's been really informative in my work as well, because I teach a lot about relationship with land and the more than human world as a kind of attachment relationship. And so something really came alive for me there as well. But I think that was really where sound came in a more conscious way that really showed me or really taught me the power of what can happen when we bring together. Really, there's a lot around ritual, community, intention, and relationship that was so potent in those spaces. And now that I get to facilitate those groups, I continue to see how that kind of magic happens. And it's so fortifying and nourishing.
Yeah, nourishing is a good word. Yeah. Well, it's sounding like, from thinking about some of the work that you have done, what I've read on your Substack and your blogs, that you are tuned into some of the missing pieces in community work, in activism work, and in general, in our whiteness. And so what has been your experience as you step into communities with your, I don't want to call it arsenal, it's like a toolbox now, right? Of all these different methods that you're weaving. And what are you seeing happening?
It's a great question. So much. When you taught us the relational movement cycle, which I know comes out of Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's work, and really exploring this concept of yield and the state of yield in our bodies and our relationship with gravity, and yield itself as a relational experience of how the body and gravity are in relationship. And then doing more research on my own into that work. Something just came up for me so instantly around applying that to a cultural framework. And so I remember you talking about belonging and the earth with yield. And, I've worked within racial justice spaces and have done anti-racism work with other white people for a long time around the pieces of white supremacy and whiteness that we carry and that are ours to work through and reckon with together. And a huge part of the underlying conditions that brought about supremacy within whiteness and that continue, I think, to keep us sort of spinning around in this is this profound disconnection from land. And we talk about that a lot in a kind of in a kind of intellectual or conceptual way. But what I really felt in that moment was, there's a proprioceptive, physical, bottom-up, tangible way we can practice this. How do our bodies actually relate to the support that the earth is offering us? And this kind of bi-directional relationship that Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about so beautiful in her work, and lots of other Indigenous teachers. And so I began applying that model in workshops and in groups to culture and asking this question: what have you learned from your people about yielding? And then moving people through a kind of guided experience of that relational movement cycle through a cultural lens. So what have you learned from your people about pushing? What have you learned from your people about reaching? And now we teach that as part of the core curriculum in Embodied Ancestral Inquiry. And time again, especially with yield, there is just this rupture. And we don't trust that the land is there. I mean, that's really profoundly, I think, where it starts. There's no trust that there's actually anything to catch us. And so we know developmentally that when we don't trust that we are held in any kind of belonging, and really, I think about like a baby in a caregiver's arms, that there's actually something underneath us that will hold us and keep us from falling into the abyss. Our whole system becomes organized around surviving that. And there is a way in which that also shapes culture. And so what I found is, like a lot of grief and fear and adaptation to that lack of trust and yield or lack of access. And it's so fascinating when you ask people, what have you learned from your people? And by your people, I mean, your ancestors, your family, your kind of kin of blood and belonging, really the people who've shaped you. about yielding after spending some time really exploring what yield means. And what bubbles up for people who may have not ever thought about this before is just like, it's dangerous, there's nothing there, it's conditional. It's so often related to, well, I can't trust it, I can't rely on it, there isn't anything. And then as we move towards push and reach, it's like, it's bad, it's wrong, it's bad, or you have to, you can never stop reaching, there's nothing on the other side, or if you stop, you'll lose everything. Just like all of this fear and scarcity, and just, you see the relational damage really kind of come to the surface. And it's so interesting to explore this in this way in our bodies we can over intellectualize this stuff so easily, but this really gets right to the heart of it. And people are often say, I think you maybe thought that was going to be really relaxing, but that wasn't the experience that I had. And I say, oh, I didn't actually think that wasn't the intention. The intention was to explore, like, really what's in our bodies around this. And so, that place of disconnection has become kind of like an orienting point for me in a lot of ways around, okay, how do we tend to that culturally, spiritually, in our bodies, in community, and really begin to start to weave some of that trust and reconnection back in. So, yeah.
Yeah, so beautifully put. So many questions that popped up as you were saying that. But I love the way that you have zeroed in on the yield is the starting point. I mean, they all are interchangeable, but if we don't have that, we can't build the others. And I love how you've taken it into the collective. And sometimes when we use the word collective in the groups I run, it's hard for people to hold that. What does that mean? Right. And so you're really dismantling that for people and breaking that down. And what I think some of this is consciousness raising of what are the strategies? What are the compensatory strategies, right? And what do those look like? And how can we humbly, with compassion, right, look at those strategies and consider where they may come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we start to look at them, look at those strategies through that lens, we start to see how culture gets shaped around the strategy. Yeah. Accumulation, grasping, scarcity is a response to not trusting that there will be enough, that there will be support. And we see that all the time. Or conditional love is this response to, well, you can't trust and rely that it's going to be there. So you have to find all these kind of workarounds. And I think it is really compassion. It brings a lot of compassion to those strategies when we explore it around this relationship to yield, because it just makes so much sense. It's like, oh, well, that's just what nervous systems will do. Like,
we don't have a choice, right?
Yeah, it's not pathology. It's not a pathology. It's just biology.
Yeah. So it's sounding like then there's pretty profound changes in some of the spaces that you're creating for people to come into more consciousness and embodied awareness of how they hold these dynamics and what has shaped them. And so, is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think I see it opening a different way of being with these questions that isn't about, I'm bad, and so I have to fix myself and change myself in order to be good, because the whole bad or good dichotomy is kept in place by this severance that is that loss of yield, and instead allows us to be curious about what are the kind of intergenerational patterns at play. What are the stories, messages, explicit and implicit that we've inherited through our families, through schooling, through other institutions. And then we start to get to introduce, what would it be like to build a relationship with a tree where you live and visit it every day and begin to have this kind of conversation. And of course, when we start to drop into more relationality with land, and yield, all sorts of grief comes up, because that's what happens when we start to heal. We feel the pain of the land that we're on and what's happened in that land. We feel the grief of having lost that relationship in our lineages for many of us. And I'm speaking specifically in a kind of settler white context, but all of our peoples carry wounds and grief around land because of the colonial project. And I think what I've noticed is that even when it kind of cuts through the intellectualizing, it cuts through some of the shame, and it speaks to something so visceral and human. And our people's bodies are kind of able to recognize, like, yes, this is so fundamental. I miss this. I long for this. There's huge grief here. But with that grief being expressed, we can also start to reopen some of those pathways, those perceptual pathways that can take in that reciprocity with the earth. And that's what's so beautiful about bringing in things like sound that just heighten our capacity to receive that kind of connection. And so, yeah, it's really profound. And I think people are often surprised. Like, I didn't expect this to be what would come up. And I love that about this work so much.
Yeah. It allows them to have their own personal experience without coming in and telling them what's going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so grief work is part of the work, and holding space for grief. And do you have any thoughts around that in terms of the providers that create the spaces like you do?
Well, grief work in certain circles is really like of the moment. There's lots of talk happening about grief.
Yeah.
And my sort of beloved co-teacher and collaborator, Stevie Joy Guiol, we talk a lot about, is grief grief as a portal. So I don't know that we can go searching for grief, but when grief comes up, I trust that that's a sign that healing is happening. And we work with this model where we've really brought a lot of these different principles together, and we use this kind of framework that maps the attachment and cultural pieces onto each other. And we talk about it as the relational organization of whiteness model. And at the bottom of this model, which is shaped like a pyramid, is this kind of piece around severance from land and this loss of yield. And then the upper part moves into the more sort of sympathetic fight-flight nervous system strategies on a cultural level. And then the top is more the parasympathetic and dorsal kind of nervous system strategies. So we map that all in a cultural way. And what I notice is that when people start to move out of the upper two quadrants of this pyramid, where we talk about the severance and supremacy loop. So we can't feel anything underneath us. So we're stuck in this kind of trauma feedback loop of over and under responding, which we see a lot in either kind of defensiveness, lashing out, rejection, denial, numbing, or like overcompensating, shame, taking on too much, burning ourselves out, being martyrs, appeasement. And so as we start to move, exit that cycle in this work and drop into what is underneath this that's keeping us in this feedback loop, which is really this piece around like loss of land and culture. Grief is kind of like the threshold that we start to pass through. We start to feel aware of, oh, there's something I'm in here, and it's taking care of something, but it's also keeping me stuck. And grief comes up when we start to really see that process and pattern and drop into what's underneath it, and really what it's taking care of, which is this loss of context and loss of story around what happened to our people, and beginning to feel into that grief, and then also reconnection. And in our work, we really believe that that's kind of and of course these models are all dynamic and interconnected, and we can be in lots of different places at once, but that's really the work of what I believe brings us into like an authentic relational kind of accountability that's not motivated by guilt or shame, but is like, oh, to be in right relationship with yield, I can't tolerate being in such misalignment and such harm with other communities and the people I love and care about. It naturally springs forth that we want to repair and be in right relationship. And so grief is important, but it's not the whole picture. And I think it's a sign that we're dropping into something deeper. And sometimes we get scared or we get stuck there. It feels so big and so collective. And it is.
Yeah,
it is
the words
more
that
than
came.
Feel alone.
Yeah, what came to me was we're dropping into our shared wounds of humanity. And so until we do that, when we're siloed in that separateness, till we drop into the shared wounds, we're not there. That's a layer of work that it has to happen. It almost, I don't know if it happens simultaneously as the individual and the ancestral, but it's like essential. It's an essential piece of undoing the spiral. So yeah, quite a process. And so requires a lot of space holding and patience and pacing. And it just sounds like from looking at your website, you're really escorting people through a transformative process. It's beautiful. Can I ask where neurodivergence comes in? Because I do want to touch on that. I know we might need a whole nother podcast for that. But you're going to make a video and be part of my online course and speak briefly about this topic. But it's something for you that also came into awareness. And so I just want to mention it a little on this show.
Yeah, thanks for that, for asking. There's so many things that I could say about neurodivergence, but so I am a late diagnosed autistic person, and it's a big part of what has been like fascinating and healing about learning about my own neurodivergence is realizing that there are ways that I perceive the world through my body that are, first of all, like not how everyone experiences or perceives the world, and that are very, that for many people who are autistic are very common and shared. And so there is often a lot of emphasis on the kind of social skills aspects of neurodivergence and specifically autism, and we can have a whole conversation about that. But the sensory piece is so fascinating to me. A lot of what got me into somatics and ancestral work was just trying to find a way to make sense of what I was experiencing. And these experiences of feeling that as though I was picking up on and sensing things in my environment or in sessions with clients, or just, being out in the world, especially the natural world, and feeling such intense experiences of more being in the room than just the two of us, or what was sort of materially visible and in a kind of ordinary sort of like state of consciousness framework, and learning about different frameworks and ways of understanding perception and sensory awareness, and how, yes, sometimes that can lead to sensory sensitivities and a lot of sensory challenges for folks on the spectrum. There is also such a gift to that way of orienting to the world that I understand now. And, it's like, yeah, maybe it's autism, maybe it's magic, maybe it's both. I don't know what people, would have called this a long, long time ago in a different time and place. And that's not to discredit the real challenges that come with being disabled in this way. But I feel as though I'm always in a kind of porous, bi-directional relationship with my environment. And I think we all have access to that, to those forms of perception, those perceptual pathways. And some of us have to learn how to kind of, maybe titrate them towards the quieter end, and some have to learn how to like turn them up a little bit. But I really want to encourage people to understand that there is a lot of value in being able to feel and sense more than we can maybe see in front of us. And that the information that comes in through emotion, mood, sensation, imagery, sound, these things are also valid ways of knowing. And it's really brought up this kind of question for me around the ways in which we view kind of attachment and co-regulation in a really kind of human-centered Western kind of neurotypical framework. And a lot of people can experience profound senses of co-regulation and relationship with non-human animals and with trees and with land. And that has always been my experience. And that's also, if we explore attachment more cross-culturally, there are lots of ways that attachment and co-regulation happens outside of just, direct face-to-face eye contact. and that I think can really open up this like, wait a minute, people have been talking for forever about this kind of deep sense of relationality with the world around us. And again, this brings me back to yield and to severance. It's like, where did that go? What happened to that? And I think a big part of what is threatening about autism and autistic perception is we never really lost that kind of connection. And so for me, it feels really powerful. And it also makes, my life challenging in lots of ways, but I don't want to be neurotypical. I don't want to lose that kind of connection. So, there's so much there to say, but I think the SSP is this like beautiful model or this beautiful tool that actually brings more appreciation and more attunement and more awareness to that form of perception, that it doesn't need to be fixed or changed. We can actually become more choiceful and aware and in relationship. So, yeah.
Yes. I think you're one of a few therapists who, through the SSP group, came into more awareness of their neurodivergence because those strategies were they were softening, right? So more of that accurate reflection of the sensitivity became available. And then, there's lots of questions of how do we treat people who are sensitive? How do we accommodate sensitivity? How do we value that as being just as important as other forms of knowledge? And it feels like the time right now is ripe for that. And there's shifts happening. Perhaps this conversation is part of it. Perhaps the SSP is part of it. I know I've recently been talking to a lot of people about the telepathy tapes podcast. It's another podcast. And there's all kinds of exciting things that are helping us to understand the value in being multi-sensory beings beyond what, we might have and culture might have established as the normal ways that we, get information and communicate. So, so it feels like a ripe time. And so you're, exploring that, writing about it. I know you have some writings on it, and we'll continue to look for those. And then my thought is we'll keep bumping into providers and people that are coming to their own understanding, new understandings about what it means to be sensitive. And I've met a couple that are kind of saying, I'm just done working so hard to cover this up. I'm done.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah. I hear you. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, in kind of summing this up, I want to make sure, we've hit all the main points. You have a new program that I just saw on your website. Maybe we can end by talking about that, a new course that just popped up there. So I'd like to hear about that. And then maybe, just go through the courses that are there so people know where to find you and what you're offering. But the newest one I thought was pretty cool, and excited to see that up there.
Yeah. The newest one is called Ancestral Embodiment. And it's really focused on the research that I've been doing over many years into different European folk traditions. So mostly pre-Christian folk practices, traditions, ritual that peoples that we could call pagan traditions across Europe have practiced and continue to practice in lots of ways, and how we can kind of pair those practices with the knowledge and frameworks and that somatics really gives us around healing our nervous systems. And so I've been really curious about, the work that's kind of coming out of neurotheology and Michael Yellowbird's work in neurodecolonization. And Steve Porges has written an article about contemplative states and polyvagal theory. And so I've been really thinking, okay, here are some practices and ways of being, and I don't even think of them as practices, because I think for people it was so much a part of daily life and just the maintenance of the day-to-day to be in relationship in these ways with spirit and land. And so, but there is a lot around song, dance, clairsentience, and trance. So those are the three kind of themes that we're exploring in this course. And so it's really about looking at how could we understand these ancestral embodiment practices through the lens of somatics and embodiment? Like, what might have been happening in their bodies? How might they have experienced their bodies and perception of the world around them based on these practices? And then actually playing with and experimenting with some of these practices, and looking at some specific kinds of traditions coming out of Ireland, the British Isles, some Eastern European practices. And so we'll kind of explore different examples of dance and movement that were designed to kind of evoke or bring about different states of consciousness in the body. We'll look at song, polyphonic singing, and kulning as these vocal practices and practices of song. What happens in people's bodies? All of these like folk songs were, for the most part, sung in groups outside on the land. They weren't performative. And then we'll explore a little bit around clairsentience and trance and shape-shifting and different examples of practices around embodying the elements and embodying animals that come out of different pagan traditions. And, I'll sort of do some storytelling. I'll contextualize with examples. We'll bring in a little bit of neuroscience and really begin to bring that kind of relationship with ancestry into our bodies more, not just as something that we think about, but that we actually feel. Is this maybe what they felt? Is this maybe what they did? And how that can be resourcing and supportive for us in the day-to-day. Because for me, this is all about bringing these practices back, bringing this kind of wisdom back for the purpose of being in the moment that we're in and really facing and addressing the challenges the immense challenges that are present in this moment. It's not about kind of some nostalgic escape. And so how can these serve us in these times is really the kind of even older.
Yeah. It speaks to me of returning to our roots, which I talk about a lot, of returning to the roots of what we knew that kept us healthy and connected. And what were those? And so you're really going through the historical information that is there, which I so appreciate about your work, and then grounding it through the body. Yeah. So it just sounds beautiful. I'm tempted to pop in and take a class myself. It sounds beautiful. So you have that going on. You have SSP groups that you run, right? And so in a similar way as some of the ones that I run. And so, and bringing in all of your wisdom that you weave in addition. And so those are all available on your website, as well as your Substack and your blog. And anything else you want to let the listeners know about before we close?
Sure. I also co-teach in a sort of separate but linked kind of container foundation training in somatics for folks who want to really deepen into this learning and become practitioners. And so that's the work of Embodied Ancestral Inquiry that I teach a foundations training in, or co-teach a foundations training in, and we're actually enrolling for our third cohort, which will start in October, which is really exciting. And so, yeah, people who want to bring together kind of work around ancestral, specifically European folk ancestral traditions with social justice and anti-racism and somatics. And we spend 9 months together really deepening in all of these frameworks and really learning how to hold space in this work for others as well, because I think it's just so vital and needed to have the skill set to hold collective healing spaces that can kind of reach all of these different dimensions of our experience. So that's the other big thing that's coming up in the fall. Exciting.
Well, I have no doubt that will fill quickly. So I'm excited to route people your direction. And I've appreciated spending this time with you and just hearing a little bit more and more details. And I'm sure we'll talk again. We might have enough to, come back and talk again. So we'll keep in touch and make sure people can find you. And thank you again. Thank you, listeners, for spending time. As always, whatever we talk about, there's an invitation to ingest whatever feels right. And if something doesn't feel right, it will find its way. It might go on a shelf for a while and you might return to it later. So trust your body, trust your nervous system, and we will see you again soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.